In this video and in the next one, we're going to take a quick break from learning about Redux to learning about a brand new ES6 syntax. This is ES6 Destructuring, and it's going to allow us to easily work with arrays and objects. So what we're going to do is just take a quick 2-video break to talk about that over in a separate file in the playground folder. Then we're going to use those techniques to come back here and improve our Redux setup. So for the moment, let's go ahead and create a new file in the playground folder. I'm going to call this one Destructuring. Destructuring.js is a great name for it. And all we're going to do is toss a console.log up top. And then we're going to go ahead and actually run this file through Webpack. So we can add some code in here and test it out. I'll crack open the Webpack file. I'm going to remove Redux 101 and replace it with the destructuring.js file. Excellent. Now, if I go ahead and actually restart the server over inside of the terminal, I should see in the browser that our console.log from the destructuring file is printing. That is exactly what's printing, which means that we are ready to actually explore this new syntax. And to kick things off, let's just go ahead and make an object. Let's create a const called person, and this is going to be an object, and we're going to add just a few pieces of data on here. That's going to allow us to actually explore destructuring. And I'm going to start off with a name. I will set it equal to Andrew. I will also set an age equal to my age, and then we're just going to set location equal to an object, and we'll just add two things describing our current location. We'll add the city. I'm currently in Philadelphia. Go ahead and use your current location. And we'll also add the temperature for our location. It's pretty hot where I am, so I'm going to toss 92 degrees Fahrenheit right inside of there. So we have all this information, and maybe this is coming back from a database query. Maybe we are getting it via an AJAX request to some sort of HTTP API. Regardless of how we get this data, it's accessible to us, and we want to start using it. Maybe we want to print some messages using the data seen here, something like console.log. Then I'll use a template string to print something like Andrew is 26. So I start by interpolating the name, that's person.name. Then I add a space, is space followed by their age, right here, person.age, and maybe I'll toss a period on the end. So there we have it. What's going to happen? We're going to get Andrew is 26. No surprises there. That is exactly what we get. With object destructuring, we're able to take an object like person and rip it apart. So we can pull off various properties out into their own variables. That means we can avoid using person.name. We can just create a name variable. And we can also avoid using person.age. We can just define an age variable. Now, for the moment, I understand why this might not be the most useful thing, but bear with me through these examples and we'll start to get to more real world ones. So right here, the goal is to be able to use a name variable and an age variable. So what tools do we already know in order to get this done? We know we can just create a const called name, setting it equal to person.name. And we also know we could create a const age, setting it equal to person.age. This is going to work. It's going to allow us to work with simple variables as opposed to pulling things off of an object or a nested object. The problem is that it doesn't scale very well. We have to do that one time for each thing we're trying to pull off. The end result, though, is still Andrew is 26. What we're going to look at is how we can do this in one line using ES6 destructuring. So let's go ahead and tackle that. I'm going to comment out these two lines, and right here, we're going to set up, once again, const. So we're still trying to create constant variables. Then I'm going to open and close some curly braces. Bear with me for a moment, and I'm going to use the assignment operator to get the values off of person. So on the right-hand side, we have the object we're trying to destructure. On the left-hand side, we have the variable type we're trying to create. It's const, but it could be let, it could be var. We just happen to be using const here. And inside of the curly braces, much like when we're grabbing named exports using import, we provide the things on this object we want to grab. In our case, we have three options: name, age, and location. What we're going to do is provide name, and we're going to provide age. So this line is equivalent to the two lines down below. They get the exact same thing done. This line creates two variables, a name variable and an age variable, and it gets those values off of person. It looks for the person property with the exact same name. So for age, it looks for person.age. For name, it looks at person.name. Now, if I go ahead and actually tweak one of these values so we can watch it change, we're going to see Andrew is 27, and that is printing using object destructuring. So this is a simpler example, and it might not be clear exactly why this is useful. So let's go ahead and look at something a little more complex. We're going to print another message related to this information right here. We're going to use console.log to print using a template string a little bit of info about the weather where we currently are. So I'm going to say something like it's 92 in Philadelphia, obviously swapping those values out with the variables up above. So for the temperature right here, I'm going to go ahead and inject that. That will be person.location.temp. And over here for the city name, I will remove the static Philadelphia and I will actually grab it off of the location object by interpolating person.location.city. Now, would this work? Sure. We can save the destructuring file, the browser refreshes, and we get it's 92 in Philadelphia. Let's say we also want to add a little bit of conditional logic, making sure those two things actually exist. So I'm going to check if, right here, we are going to check if person.location.city exists, and we're also going to check if person.location.temp exists, and then and only then, if both of those are there, will we actually print the message. Now, I know this isn't foolproof code. A temperature of 0 would result in this being falsy. You could use type of to fix that, but for our purposes, this is perfectly fine. So once again, I save destructuring, and over here we get our message. The problem with code like this, especially when we're grabbing it off of a nested object, is that we end up doing it in multiple places throughout our code. So I'm trying to access the temperature in a few different spots, which means I'm pulling it off of person.location every single time. With destructuring, we can simplify this code, making it, in my opinion, much more readable by creating a destructuring statement. Right here, we are going to get some constants off of person.location. So just like person is an object, person.location is also an object. So it's perfectly valid to destructure off of a nested object. Now in here, we can determine the things off of the location object we want. We have two things, and we actually do want both of them. So right here, I'm going to grab city, and I'm also going to grab the temperature. Now that we have both city and temperature broken out into their own variables, there's no need for person.location before every single one of these. So we can simplify the code just referencing city and temp here and down below as well. Right here, we put the temp right in the string, and then we put the city right into the string. And that creates code that is much more readable, still working with the exact same data from the beginning. So if I do go ahead and actually save the destructuring file, once again, we are getting the data showing up. And if the temperature goes down at night to 88, for example, we're going to see that data. It is indeed coming from the destructuring code as seen right here. Now, there are two more features I want to talk about with destructuring before we go. First is the ability to rename the local variable we create. So here we create a temp variable and we access it down below. And the temp variable comes from the temp property on person.location. So these names match up 1 to 1. They're exactly the same. But what if I don't want a local temp variable? What if I want a local, right here, temperature variable instead? How exactly do I get that done? Maybe I want to use temperature in both locations. It's more descriptive and it's easier to read, in my opinion. So what do we need to do? Well, we can still use destructuring to get this done. We just have to introduce the renaming syntax. So right here, after the thing we're trying to destructure, we can use a colon space and give it a new name. So I could call this temperature. This is going to have the effect of grabbing the temp property off of person.location and adding it to a new temperature const. And if I go ahead and save the program, we're going to see that everything still works as expected. If I did try to access temp, let's say I try to access temp here and here, we're now no longer going to have access to that variable. Temp is not defined. We've renamed it to temperature, so the temp variable never gets created, even though it's still grabbing the value from person.location.temp. So I'm going to switch these back over to temperature, and once again, everything is going to work. Now, the other feature I want to talk about with destructuring is the ability to set up default values. So for a city and for a temp, it might not make sense to have a default, but for name, we could definitely have a default. I could default it to the string anonymous. Currently, if there is no name on the person, it is going to try to create a name variable whose value comes from person.name. That's going to result in undefined, and the end result will be undefined is 27 printing. When we're destructuring, we can actually set up defaults. So we can say, hey, if person.name exists, great. Take that value and set it equal to the name constant. But if there is no value for person.name, use this instead. Right here, we just set it equal to some value, much like we do inside of our function arguments when we're setting up defaults there. So I might use a string and I would set that equal to anonymous. Now we are going to have a default fallback value if there is no person.name. If I rerun the program, we're no longer getting undefined as 27. Instead, we are getting anonymous as 27. And if I did add the name back in, it would use that. So if I bring the name back into play, once again, we will get the name showing up. It's only going to use the default value if there is no value on the object you're destructuring for that thing. Now, can we put these two together? Can we have a default value and rename it? Sure, the syntax gets a little clunky, but it will indeed work. So I could rename name to something like first name. Let's say I want to use first name here, which is more descriptive than name, but I don't have access to change the data structure for some reason. All we need to do is use the exact same syntax. So right after name, colon space, the new thing, first name, and we can still leave the default in place exactly as we have it. So what's this going to do? This is going to create a local const first name. It's going to get the value from person.name. If that doesn't exist, it'll use anonymous instead. If I go ahead and save the program, once again, everything works. We are getting Andrew is 27. We are getting that from the first name variable. And if there was no person.name, we would have had a nice fallback to anonymous. Now it's challenge time. I'm going to take all of the code in this file and comment it out down below. Together, we're going to define a brand new object, and it's going to be your challenge to actually destructure this in some meaningful way. So I'm going to create a const called book, and this is going to store some information about a book. Books have titles, so I will set up title. And the book that I'm currently reading is Ego is the Enemy. It's a great book by Ryan Holiday. We're also going to store his name in author. And then we're going to go ahead and set that up as a string, Ryan Holiday. And the last thing we're going to toss on here is a publisher object. So under publisher, we are going to create the object, and we are going to set the publisher name equal to whoever the current publisher is. And in this case, the book was published by Penguin. So we have this object that contains some useful information about a given book. We have book information and we have the publisher, and that has the publisher object, which contains some information about the publisher. It's going to be your job to actually make the following console.log statement work. Right here, that's going to be console.log publisher name. So publisher name is not a variable that exists on the book object. So what you're going to need to do is use a little bit of destructuring. You're also going to be using a little bit of renaming, and you're going to set up a default value. So if there is a valid publisher and it has a name property, you're going to use that. In this case, it would be Penguin. But if there is no name on that publisher object, you're going to go ahead and use the default value of self-published. So right here, self-published. This is for the default. This is when there is a valid name on the publisher object. So your challenge is to get this to work using destructuring. You just have to add one line right here, wire everything up, and then test things out. With the current code, you should see Penguin printing. Then go ahead and just comment this line out or remove it completely, and you should see self-published printing. Take as much time as you need, pause the video, and when you're done, click play. All right, let's go ahead and knock this one out. The goal is to grab the publisher name, but we want to create the publisher name variable. So I'm going to start by setting up the basic destructuring statement. I want to destructure some stuff. I'm not sure what just yet. And I want to get it from not the book object, but the book.publisher object. This is where the information I want lives. Now, what do we want off of the publisher object? I want the name, but I don't want a local name variable. I want this console.log statement to work, and we're using publisher name, so I need to rename it, :space publisher name. Now, is this going to work? Sure. I can go ahead and save destructuring.js. Over here, we get Penguin, all is well. But if I were to comment out this line, we're going to get undefined. So there's currently no default value for the publisher name. And I did ask you to set one of those up as well. So right here, I'm going to set that equal to a string. If there is no name property on book.publisher, we will use the string self-published. Now I can go ahead and actually save the destructuring file for the final time. Right here, we get self-published printing to the screen, which is fantastic. This is exactly what you needed to set up to complete the challenge. So what have we learned in this video? We've learned that we can destructure objects. We can pull things off of objects, creating separate variables for those values. In this case, we have a lot of strings and numbers, but it could work for anything else as well. Now, what does destructuring do? It allows us to create those local variables. It allows us to rename them and to set default values for them. And all of this comes from the object we define. This is a very handy syntax. We'll be using it in quite a few different places, including function arguments, as you're going to see in just a couple of videos. For now, though, we do have the basics of the syntax down. In the next video, we're going to take just a quick moment to talk about array destructuring, then we'll get back to Redux. So stay tuned, and I'll see you then.